following program contains adult content. Some scenes may include graphic truthfulness, shocking honesty, and revealing insight. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hi, and welcome once again to Adult Content. My name is Brian Content. It is the final day of August 2006. We're glad you're along. We've got some interesting conversation tonight. Is there a conspiracy surrounding the events of 9/11? We're going to continue our discussion tonight of some of the curiosities that occurred that day and what might be done about it. But first, let's check the top news stories of the hour. Iran has followed through on a promise not to give up its efforts to develop nuclear technology. By allowing a United Nations Security Council deadline to pass today, the UN had hoped to entice Iran into submission by threatening worldwide sanctions, but now the ball is back in the UN's court. However, it is still not clear whether any sanctions could be leveled against Iran because Security Council member nations China and Russia have already indicated that they would not support sanctions. Tropical storm Ernesto is headed toward a second landfall, this time on the South Carolina-North Carolina border. Officials say it could become a hurricane by the time it makes landfall. They say the storm is re-intensifying and they say it could reach hurricane velocity within the next 12 hours or so. Both the Carolinas and Virginia have now declared states of emergencies. Israel has begun withdrawing from Lebanon. Today, Israel turned over a small section of the border area of Lebanon to Lebanese troops and United Nations peacekeepers. The move is seen as a symbolic gesture mostly, to help pave the way for a larger international force to come in and take over security. Meanwhile, a pledge of $1 billion for rebuilding Lebanon was made today by members of an international conference of donors who were meeting in Sweden. It was another bloody day in Iraq today. Officials say a series of attacks left at least 51 people dead, including 43 people within a half hour in a heavily Shiite section of Baghdad. Dozens of people were also reported wounded today. It has been an exceptionally violent week in Iraq, with the deaths of hundreds of people by car bombs, roadside bombs, mortars, rockets, and gunfire. Although U.S. officials say overall, there were fewer deaths in August this year than there were a year ago at this time. Well, stock trading ended today with the early gains being wiped out despite some positive comments about the future of the economy that were made by the Federal Reserve Board chairman. At the end of trading today, both the Dow Jones Industrials and the NASDAQ had each lost just under 2 points. South Florida weather calls for partly cloudy skies tonight. Looks like we're going to have some scattered showers and thunderstorms lingering, but the rain chance should fall off to about 30% by morning, and lows overnight will be in the mid-70s inland to upper 70s on the coast. And then for tomorrow, starting off partly sunny with the rain chance building to 60% by the afternoon, highs should reach into the lower 90s. All right, coming up, we're going to be talking to filmmaker Dave Von Kliest, who is leading a call to reopen the 9/11 investigation based on some suggestive activities that day. And welcome back to Adult Content. Yesterday on the program, we were exploring some of the theories about 9/11 that are inconsistent with what the official report of what happened that day are. Some of the things we talked about with our guest, Dave Von Kliest, were how a 757 could have entered the Pentagon in that crash and made such a small hole. We also talked about how there was so little damage to the facade from the wings striking the outside and the tail section striking it, why there was only one existing video clip of that crash in what is certainly one of the most secure facilities on the planet, by all means. We also talked about the origins of flashes that occurred on the nose of each of the jetliners that struck the World Trade Center just a fraction of a second before impact, and the appearances of distortions on the fuselage of United Flight 175, which struck the South Tower, and a notion that it was a modified aircraft of some sort that may have been carrying explosives. Now I'm bringing back my guest, Dave Von Kliest, who has produced a video documentary called 9/11 in Plain Sight. Dave, how you doing today?
Just great, and thank you once again for the invitation for a return engagement here.
Well, it's my pleasure. We had a lot of ground to cover. Your documentary does cover a lot of things. Unfortunately, we ran out of time yesterday to go through them all, but I tried to do a little bit of a recap, and when we did run out of time, we were still talking about the Flight 175 that hit the South Tower, and what appears to be some distortion on the bottom of the fuselage, and you were making a point about what your theory might be in regard to that.
Well, frankly, I don't know what it is, but it doesn't make any difference what it is. I mean, it could be Pee Wee Herman strapped to the belly of the plane. The bottom line is that whatever appears on the belly of that plane should not be there. If that was Flight 175, that a United airliner that had departed from Boston Logan International Airport, surely it would have been seen by baggage handlers, food service personnel, fuel handlers, passengers, crew members, pilots, maintenance workers, control tower personnel. Somebody would have seen this object attached to the belly of the plane. Now, there have been many rebuttals about that. Popular Mechanics magazine a year ago last March, and again in the recent release from James Meeks, who's the editor, they've just put out a book that you can get at Barnes & Noble, Debunking the 9/11 Lies is what it's called. And their expert was a gentleman by the name of Ron Greeley.
Right.
Now, Ron Greeley works at the Space Laboratory, and his job is to identify geologic shapes based upon light and shadow. Now, that was their expert.
Right.
Our expert was Colonel George Nelson of the United States Air Force, with 30 years identifying aircraft and aircraft parts. And according to Colonel Nelson, that plane had extra equipment attached and was not a commercial airliner.
Now, there were witnesses as well who saw the impact. Certainly at that point, all eyes were trained on the World Trade Center towers, and some people are insisting and sticking by their stories that what struck there was not a normal airliner. And we have a clip right now that I want to show with Mark Bernack, who I believe was a Fox News Network editor or employee, who gave his impression of what he saw at that time. Let's roll that clip.
Floors of the World Trade Center in Manhattan in flames now after apparently two large airplanes, we're talking about jetliners here, slammed into the sides right around 9 o'clock this morning. Mark, if what you say is true, those could be cargo planes or something like that. You said you didn't see any windows in the side?
I didn't see any windows in the sides. I saw the plane flying low. I was probably like a block away from the subway in Brooklyn, and that plane came down very low. And again, it was not a normal flight that I've ever seen at an airport. It was a plane that had a blue logo on the front, and it did not look like it belonged in this area.
All right, that was Mark Bernack being interviewed by Fox News, giving his impressions of what he saw, and he was in Brooklyn, admittedly probably at least a mile away from the site, but he was not the only one who reported seeing something other than what would be a normal passenger jetliner that day.
Right. There was another witness whose testimony is on the video, 9/11 in plain sight. And this gentleman said that this was not a commercial airliner. It was a great, big, gray twin-engine plane. It was not a commercial airliner. But we cannot go by witness testimony. That's one of the things that folks always say, well, the witnesses say this, witnesses say that. Witnesses are always dispelled because, A, they can have conflicting testimony, B, they could be wrong, or C, they could be influenced. So we can't go by witness testimony unless the witness testimony is consistent with the evidence.
Right.
So as an example, TWA Flight 800, there were over 700 people that claimed that they saw something shoot up and hit that plane off the coast of Long Island. And over 200, I think 226 people signed affidavits to that effect. But nonetheless, the FBI and the NTSB and the government officials dispelled and just paid no attention to witness testimony. However, in the case of the Pentagon, anybody that says that they saw a plane, a 757, hit the Pentagon, that is being held up in this case as evidence, but it is not. We have to go by the evidence itself, photographic and video evidence, and come to our own conclusions. And that's all we're asking of the people that view this documentary. Use your own head, because the mainstream networks will show you a picture or a video clip, and they will tell you what you see. In our presentation, we show you photographs and video clips, and we ask you, what do you see? And that's the difference here, because you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be a certified, registered, and licensed pyrotechnic expert to have a valid claim of fire here. And we have a very, very valid claim.
Now, let's move along a little bit, because another part of your expose touched on the notion that the towers came down not just as a result of the impact of jetliners, but perhaps by some explosives that may have been planted at ground level. And there is some conjecture in that regard as well. Rick Sanchez, who is a reporter who South Floridians know because he was working at WSVN, Channel 7 in Miami for years, he was on the scene and gave some credence to at least the possibility of something out of the ordinary at ground level that day. I'd like to play that clip also and set that up for discussion. Let's roll that.
Sanchez has been there throughout this morning for us. Rick, tell us where you are and what the latest is.
Well, I'm in that area, if you're familiar with this area, of where West Broadway and Hudson come together, right at Chambers. That would put us about a block and a half away from the site of where the explosion was. That area has just been evacuated because police have found what they describe as a suspicious device, and they fear that it might be something that could lead to another explosion. Obviously, there's a real sense of caution here on the part of police. I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area, and that's why they're being so cautious.
All right. Now, Dave, you're familiar with that soundbite and that clip of video with reporter Rick Sanchez, who certainly had some modicum of credibility, at least from South Florida standpoint. He's a veteran reporter. And he gave a pretty sober report there, I thought, and seemed to be right on the mark, at least from what he was being told, and yet nothing ever developed out of that I'm aware of.
Well, there were so many reports of explosions and bombs going off around the Trade Center area. Even People magazine on page 24 of their September 24th issue, I think it was, they did an interview with a gentleman by the name of Louis Caccioli, a firefighter, from Harlem, and he had stated that they were making several trips in and out of the building, and they thought bombs were going off inside of the building. And there were other firefighters. As a matter of fact, the French videographer by the name of the Naudet brothers.
The Naudet brothers, right?
They did the video simply called 9/11. And one of the clips, and it's a very short clip, about 15 seconds. This is what some of the firefighters described as they were running for their lives. Listen to what they said here.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was just if it had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building.
All the way down.
Now, that was them saying that it sounded like a planned detonation. Boom, 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 all the way down. Mm-hmm. So there are too many folks out there that were there and that described explosions going off. And one of the most compelling testimonies that we do have comes from a gentleman by the name of William Rodriguez, who I've become quite good friends with over the past couple of years. He was a maintenance worker, and he worked at the Trade Center for 20 years. He had reported for work that morning, and the first thing that happened, according to Mr. Rodriguez, and he was in the B2 level, the second level below ground level, the first thing that he reported happened was an explosion that happened below him, and a few seconds later, they heard the thud of the plane hitting the North Tower. That's the very first thing that happened. Now, when he testified before the 9/11
Let me hold you.
Testimony was the only testimony that was censored or stricken from the record.
Hold it at that thought. We're going to come back after this break. And this is Adult Content on WHDT with my guest Dave Von Kliest, who is a filmmaker and a radio talk host from the Midwest, Missouri, I believe, Dave, if I'm not mistaken. 9/11 in Plain Sight is the documentary that he made and narrates as well, and puts together a lot of information there that it's certainly worth a good look. It's very compelling, and I want to move on now. You were continuing to talk about this testimony that was given after the fact by one of these employees who had reported to work that morning and heard an explosion.
That's correct. William Rodriguez had reported that the first occurrence was an explosion that happened below him. He was in the B2 level, and the first explosion, he testified, was below him, and a few seconds later, the plane hit the North Tower up above him. And all of the other maintenance workers, there were only 5 people with master keys The other 4 disappeared. They couldn't be found. He was the only one left with the master key to open the doors, to help the firefighters lead them up the stairs, open the doors, unlock them, and lead people out. He made several trips, and he saved hundreds of lives. And on the final trip out, that was when the North Tower began to collapse, and the only way he survived is that he dove underneath a fire truck, and it took several hours to dig him out.
Wow.
So he is the consummate World Trade Center hero.
Unbelievable, unbelievable, and just one of so many stories that came out of